Hello and welcome to CAEL 201. This is Brandy speaking and I will be your presenter today. Today's webinar is all about the independent speaking section of the CAEL test. So let's get underway. As you're getting settled in there, wherever you're listening from, I'll remind you that your microphones are muted, but we're going to use the Zoom chat box here to communicate. So you can see I've already written a little welcome message there in Zoom chat. Please, if you've got any questions at all about CAEL, especially the speaking sections, since that's what we're discussing today, you can put your questions in that little box as well. Now, if something should happen with the tech, perhaps the sound should freeze or the slides aren't showing correctly, etc., please let me know about it right away in that Zoom chat box, and I will fix it if I'm able to. If it is an issue on your own computer system, the best advice I'll give you right now is to log out of Zoom and log right back in again. And hopefully that will reset your system and you'll be able to follow along today. You're most welcome to take notes today, but quite honestly, as long as you follow, you can take screenshots as well. And do know that within the next 24 hours, we are going to be emailing you anyways with a very helpful study pack of materials. So within that email will be 3 different links. The first link will take you to a survey, and that part is completely optional if you want to give feedback. The second link is going to take you to the study pack of CAEL materials, which is going to summarize the main speaking strategies that we'll be discussing today. We're also going to be listening to different test takers' answers today. I've got the recordings of these speaking responses and we'll be discussing them in session, but you'll also receive the transcripts in the study pack so you can review them later on your own time. And last but not least, if you cannot stay for the full 90 minutes today, that is perfectly fine. We keep one master copy of all of our webinars recorded on our YouTube channel. So you can either click on the link that we send you in this email to open up that recording of the CAEL 201, or if you'd like, you can go directly to our YouTube channel for CAEL and you'll find our updated playlist there. And you can watch all of our free webinars. As I say, you'll find one copy of each posted there for the public to view. So this is me. My name is Brandy, and I am an online instructor and a content developer for the CAEL test. I have been helping students prepare to take CAEL for about 5.5 years or so. I've been teaching those since the late 1990s, a very long time, more than 25 years now, all said and done. And most of my teaching career has involved working with adult learners, mainly who are developing their language skills or their soft skills or job readiness skills, etc., to improve their ability to settle into the community and find meaningful employment. So it's my pleasure to be here today to offer you up some tips and strategies on how you would be successful on the CAEL academic test, predominantly in the speaking sections, which is what we're here to discuss today. Now, before I forget, I am going to mention this little academic success bundle. I'll remind you at the end, but do know that once you've registered for your official CAEL test, if you use the discount code CAEL25, you're going to receive 25% off your test registration cost. And you're also going to receive all of these study materials listed in the middle of the slide there under the bulleted points. You're going to get these all for free. So there are practice tests, there are online courses, there's a textbook, there's another CAEL Test Plus, which is another product that takes you through step-by-step how to be successful on CAEL. So if you were to purchase these products individually in the online bookstore, the total cost would be about $400, but we're very happy to welcome this to you for free once you've registered for the test. So it's showing a commitment on your end to improve your academic skills before you actually take the test. So here's what we're going to do together today in the next 85 minutes. I will start with a brief introduction to what CAEL is all about. We will then look at the speaking task format. So we'll examine what the computer screens will look like when we take our CAEL test, as the entire test is done online. And we're going to focus on the independent speaking questions today. This is CAEL Part 1, and there are 3 questions in particular. You can see them listed here on agenda items number 3 to 5. So they're called Type A, Type B, and Speaking on a Visual. For each of these questions, I'm going to share with you a real CAEL test question from a past test. We're going to quickly talk about our own strategies, and I'll play for you a response from a real test taker who answered that exact question when they took CAEL. We'll talk about that test taker's score, what they did well as they spoke, and where they might want to continue to improve as they develop these skills at home. Last but not least, at the very end of our session today, I will quickly run over our CAEL study materials as well. There are some free products, and I can introduce you to the online bookstore as well if you find that helpful. So let's get underway. And again, a reminder that you're welcome to ask your questions in the Zoom chat box there as I'm presenting. So CAEL is the name of this test, as you know, I'm sure, but the reason we spell it this way is because the 4 letters that make up the word CAEL are actually an acronym. The CAEL stands for the Canadian Academic English Language Test. So yes, this is a Canadian test, and yes, it's testing your academic English skills. It's a very aptly named for sure. The entire test is delivered on the computer as well, by the way. So whether you take this test from your home computer or in an official testing center, you will be doing this test online, even the speaking sections. And I'll explain more about that in a moment. Now, the reason you would take CAEL primarily would be if you're looking to study at a Canadian university or college. So every major institution in Canada will accept the CAEL score for entrance into their school for study purposes. So of course, the schools need to verify that you've got a sufficient level of English skills in order to start your program of study there. The second reason why some people are taking CAEL, and more in recent times as well, is if they are pursuing a professional designation. So I've got one example on the screen here, the CICC, which is an immigration field. There are many professional organizations that also will ask of their employees for proof of their language proficiency in English. You'll find a complete listing of all these organizations right on the CAEL website, cael.ca. But do know that this has become a more popular reason for people to take CAEL in recent time, as well as I said earlier, if you're looking to study as well. Now, this entire test is what we call integrated. So for the most part, you're going to be combining your language skills to both understand and produce meaning. So you might be reading an article and then speaking about it, for example. And that's an example of integrating or combining the reading and speaking skills together. This test is also topic-based. So all of the reading and listening passages are going to be based on either arts or science-based backgrounds. So that's what we mean when we say topic-based. You can imagine studying at the first-year college or university and any type of arts or science degree that you might be pursuing. That's the sort of topic that you might encounter on your own CAEL test. By the time you're finished taking this test, it should give you yourselves a very realistic assessment of your readiness to pursue your goal. So again, whether you're looking to start studying at a post-secondary institution in Canada or advance your career here as well. And whoever you're using this score to apply to, whether it's an employer or a school, they also will have a very good understanding about your readiness and opportunity for success based on your current language level, which is the reason why you take the test in the first place. So I mentioned just earlier that you must take the CAEL test on a computer, but you can also take it on your home computer. And we do call that version the at-home test. We call it CAEL Online. And I know that's a little bit misleading in the sense that whether you're in a testing center or at home, you're still taking the test online. But in order to differentiate the registration process on the computer, we refer to the at-home test as CAEL Online. So if you choose that option when you register to take CAEL, it means you will be using your home computer to take the test. If you live in one of these countries listed on screen, then that's where that program is available. If not, you would have to actually book into a physical testing center. And some people prefer, even though they might be comfortable in their own home, some people might prefer going into the testing room to actually take the test, because again, you've got the staff there to help or troubleshoot if there's a glitch with the technology. Sometimes our home Wi-Fi or internet isn't necessarily stable. So by taking the test in a testing center, it gives you a little bit more peace of mind with the tech aspect of things. But again, it's completely up to you. There is a huge write-up on the cael.ca website giving you the specs and parameters about what your computer system at home would have to have as a minimum requirement to support this test at home. At any rate, here is your whole test from start to finish. It takes about 3 hours for the average test taker to complete all sections, and we do complete them in this exact order. We don't have a choice about that. So you'll notice that part 1 at the top is speaking. Those are the 3 question types that we're going to be examining in detail today. You're also going to notice as you look to the timing section on the right-hand side here in that column, that the speaking section in the first part is the fastest by far. And that's because part 1 is the only part of CAEL that you're only completing one language skill, in this case, speaking. By the time you get to part 2 and all the way down to part 5, you'll notice we've got little red square brackets all the way through. And that's to emphasize to you the different language skills you'll be combining together as you work through those sections. So part 2 is all about reading and then speaking about something you've learned in the reading passage. Part 3 is the listening section. So you'll be listening first and then speaking on something you've learned. Parts 4 and 5 both include reading, listening, and writing. In part 4, when you're writing, you'll be completing a longer passage, sort of like an essay, and you must use details from both the reading and listening sections. In part 5, you're still writing on one of those source materials, but the computer instructions will tell you whether you're to use the reading or the listening passage. And the writing in part 5 is short, sort of like a paragraph or so. So that's the structure of this whole test. Again, whenever you've got a reading or a listening passage from parts 2 to 5, you can see there are different topics. So this is where those arts or science-based backgrounds will come into play. And there will be a good mix, a good balance to accommodate everybody's interest and skill set for sure. We do offer individual webinars that walk you through each part of this CAEL test. So today we're looking at CAEL 201. But as you can see, if you wanted to come back the next time we offer CAEL 202, that would be just about the listening and so on. CAEL 203, or sorry, CAEL 202 I meant is about the reading, CAEL 203, the listening and so on. CAEL 204, we combine parts 4 and 5 together since you're performing the same skills there. All of your speaking questions here are shown in red. So there are 5 speaking questions to complete all together, and you'll be finished the speaking assessment by the end of CAEL part 3. So just a little bit, about halfway, I suppose. And today's session, we're only going to look at part 1. So we will be talking only about those first 3 questions. We offer a different webinar called CAEL 301, which is a speaking webinar. And that one will cover all 5 tasks if you're interested in taking that, or again, watching the recorded version on our YouTube channel. So before we get into the practice, I wanted to just circle back to the topics I'd mentioned earlier about either arts or science-based backgrounds. So we've got just a very small sample of topics that you could encounter on any CAEL test from both sections, whether arts or science. The good news is you don't have to have any background knowledge about any of these topics. So if you look quickly at the arts section, you'll see anthropology at the top, you'll see political science at the bottom. It doesn't mean you have to have any knowledge whatsoever about these subjects, because as long as your language skills are strong enough that you can understand what you're listening to or reading about, that's where all of your answers are going to come from. So please don't stress about it or worry about it and try to go out and learn what you can about any arts or science-based background. It might give you a little bit of reading practice, sure, but you definitely would add too much stress to your study routine. Just focus on the language skills, and then the rest will follow. The scoring for this test is done in what we call bands, and you can see those band scores listed on the left-hand side of this chart. So band 90 at the top is the topmost score anybody could achieve on CAEL, and this would demonstrate expert proficiency. Even a band 80 as well, 80 or 90 would indicate expert proficiency. And as we decrease down the chart towards the bottom, you'll notice that level 10 or band 10 would be entry level. We call that low beginner, and so would a band 20. So there are no half scores in CAEL. Everything is provided in increments of 10, so rounded to the nearest 10. And I can't tell you precisely what score you will need on your own CAEL test because it depends on the purpose for why you're taking CAEL. I will say that for the average person looking to study at a Canadian university or college, the majority of institutions in Canada do ask a band 70. And if you look at the descriptor here for band 70, it says that you've got adept communication styles, which in plain English means that you already have a fairly strong foundation and can understand and be understood, but there might still be some limitations or some weaknesses that you're continuing to develop, which makes sense because when we begin a program of study, or if we're just starting off in a career field, we're not expected to know it all on day 1. So the idea would be that the more you communicate in English and use those skills, you're going to strengthen those skills over time. So band 70 is about average, but not all schools will ask a 70. If you're lucky, some will ask a 60. That's an easier score to achieve as it's lower. But on the other hand, some schools might ask a band 80. And the same goes with employers. So I ask each of you taking the CAEL test to do your own research, if you will. Double check with the schools you're going to apply to or the employers, and make sure you know what your main score is going to be, because of course that's going to help you achieve it, we hope anyway. At any rate, let's get into the speaking task format. So when you take this test, whether you're at your home computer or whether you're in a CAEL testing room, you will be seated in front of a computer workstation. You'll complete the whole test that way, as we said, but you are going to be wearing a headset throughout the entire test. This is, of course, how you'll complete the listening sections, but there are also little instructions for each part of the test throughout that might be read out loud to you. So you'll keep that headset on your ears throughout the entire test. There will be a microphone attached to the headset, and this is how you're going to complete the speaking responses that are asked of you. So you never come face to face with a human rating team that are going to interview you and give you a score based on your speaking ability. That's the good news about CAEL. You'll complete these responses by just sitting on your own in front of the computer, speaking into that microphone, and the recorded voice, your recorded voice, is going to be sent out to the rating team later on. And their job then is to determine how many strengths you've demonstrated across these 4 key sections of assessment that you see listed here. So I'll start off with the delivery skills. This is the most obvious when it comes to speaking, I would say. It pretty much assesses your speech presentation skills. So when we're speaking in any language, frankly, not just in English, the foundational skills that we want to make sure we're performing well in would be speaking loudly enough to be heard, speaking at a comfortable speed so that the listener can easily follow, and our pronunciation has to be clear as well. Now, it's okay to speak in whatever accent you might have. There are so many English speakers worldwide, and a lot of people have different accents depending on where they grew up, and that's fine. It's not the accent that determines the clarity of pronunciation. It's where we are stressing those words, how we are enunciating and blending the sounds together. So please do make sure you've got at least the basics covered so you can be easily understood. And once we've mastered those foundational skills, the next step becomes to fine-tune the speech so that we can speak from beginning to end of these responses with very few pauses or interruptions. So hopefully during the test, we're not stopping for a great length of time. Even 5 or 6 seconds of silence in the middle of a response is going to distract the listener. So we try to keep the speech moving forward. We also try not to interject too often. And I know that's hard sometimes, but if we say or ah in the middle of every sentence, you can imagine how frustrated the listener is going to become. So it's natural to a point. Every now and then we might interject, and that's fine. But please try to eliminate or reduce, I guess, the number of interjections that you make. And that does come with vocabulary development as well as practice at home. The rhythm and intonation of the voice will also be taken into account. And these are skills that follow the more that we speak the language aloud. So I do hope that you're practicing speaking in English at home, in the community, etc. Let's move on to that second section below there, the accuracy of language. So this would definitely look at the vocabulary words that you are including in your responses. Now, in the part 1 questions we look at today, the first 2 questions are going to be based on your own personal experiences, usually around your education. So yes, we still want to produce an academic tone, but it is perfectly acceptable and normal to personalize the speech as we're talking. You will be using personal pronouns like I, because you will be explaining elements or past experiences you've had, and that's all fine. But overall, we definitely want to include words that create this academic tone. So a little bit higher level if we can, more precision, more interest. The better variety of language you can demonstrate as you're speaking, the higher the score generally. We just need to make sure that the language use is accurate in meaning, but also natural too. We don't want to just force these really long, complicated words into our speech if they don't make sense to do so in that case. The next element of language beyond just individual word use would be your sentence structure. So at the academic level, like in CAEL, it's expected by now that we're capable of forming compound and complex sentence structures. So we try to avoid speaking in very short, simple sentences. We wouldn't do that so much in the academic world. So learn those conjunctions, learn those transitions, study them at home, and then produce them naturally. Try to connect your short ideas together as you speak. So you've got these longer structures that are a little bit more complex. Over on the right-hand side, we've got the content of your response. And the content of your speech mirrors to a point the structure of, say, a paragraph when you're writing. You're still going to introduce the topic right away so that the listener knows what you'll be discussing. So that's the main idea or the general overview. And then throughout the remaining part of your speech, you're going to provide a series of main ideas or reasons. And for each main idea you present, you want to back that up with at least one, maybe even two examples or specific details. So the more you extend and connect ideas together, the more interesting the response is, but also the more coherent and well supported. The ideas should flow together in a logical sequence that the listener can follow and understand your train of thought and what you're trying to communicate. At the very end, we try to include a concluding sentence of sorts. So sometimes you might just, if it was an opinion question that you were answering, you might just want to find a different way to rephrase your opinion, just to remind the listener about your main idea there. That's one way to conclude. Another really good way to conclude a response, I think, is to leave a sort of prediction for the future. So whatever you've just been talking about, you might have an idea for the next step and leave that as the ending of the response, because it gives the listener something to think about and it continues to engage their attention. So these are tips you might want to practice at home. The task fulfillment here at the bottom, it looks really short, but it is so, so important. We need to absolutely answer the entire question on CAEL, and we should be doing so in the time allotted to us. So throughout the speaking test, you've got 5 responses to deliver, and you will be speaking anywhere between 1 minute to 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And the instructions will tell you how much time you have to speak. We try to use the majority of that time well to demonstrate strengths in all of these areas. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's looking for perfection, but you certainly don't want to stop talking with 20 seconds left on the clock, for example. So part of your score is using the time wisely. But more importantly, I think, is to answer the full question. And as you'll see in the examples I'm going to share with you, some of these questions tend to have almost 2 parts to them. So it's important to read your instructions and make sure that you're answering the full thing. The last thing I'll mention about your scoring here is that you want to make sure when you're practicing at home that you are hitting on major skill sets across all 4 of these areas. So don't just practice your speech delivery, for example. It would be great if you had strong speech presentation skills, sure. But if you still are not developing your vocab and you're not looking at sentence structure and you don't know how to structure your response and you're not giving specific examples and so on, if you're performing weakly across the other 3 areas of this chart, just having strong delivery skills is not going to help you earn the highest score you can. So it is sort of a package deal. I like to think of it with the strengths demonstrated across all areas. And again, the weaknesses too will be identified and the raters will make a determination on your overall score. I've added one little part here at the bottom. It's called speaking on a visual. And this only applies to the 3rd question in part 1. So we'll talk more about it when we get there. But just know that this question asks you to actually analyze and describe a graph or some sort of a visual element that's in front of you. So part of your score for that question is going to also include how accurately you're using information from that source to build the answer. You still will be assessed on all 4 other elements here. That key checklist we just discussed is going to be used for all 5 responses. But again, that speaking on a visual is just a little bit extra specifically for the 3rd question. And this checklist is available to you in multiple formats. It is posted on the website and you'll get a copy of it in your study pack within 24 hours of watching this video. And I do encourage you to practice speaking at home. I encourage you to record your practice into your cell phone or some other recording device. Play back your responses and go through this checklist first of all by yourself. Make sure you are demonstrating lots of strengths across the whole thing. If you notice a weakness, that's where your study time should be devoted. You always want to bring your weaknesses up to the strongest points they possibly can. You can work with a tutor or an instructor. There are CAEL prep programs So the chances are the tutor would already have this checklist, but by all means, we need to be familiar with it so we know what skills to demonstrate. Anyway, let's ease our way into the actual test questions in computer format here. So I'm showing you the 2 time clocks at the top of the screen, and we'll start with the left-hand side, which is all about preparation time. So the good news is for each of those 5 speaking questions throughout the whole test that you're going to be asked to deliver or to answer, you will have a little bit of time to read over the question and start thinking of your key points. Oftentimes the prep time is short. Sometimes you'll have 30 seconds, sometimes a minute. So we do need to read quickly and think quickly, but we want to use our prep time wisely. Some people like to take notes, by the way. So you might want to write down some key ideas, especially if you've got some great vocabulary that you want to remember to insert into the speech when the time comes. So after that prep time on screen counts down, when it gets to 0, you're going to be prompted to speak. And this is when your microphone turns on, and you'll see see what you're looking at on the right-hand side. The word says recording, and then that little icon of the microphone, I guess, is visible on screen. On the real test, that gray bar that you see there is going to bounce gently up and down as you're speaking. And that tells you that the microphone is correctly picking up your voice. Also on the official test, that blue bar beneath the word recording is going to move all the way over to the right-hand side. It's going to fill up the entire space there. No more white space will be left. And this is the timer. So if this were a 60-second question, it would take 60 seconds for that blue bar to make its way across. So this will be visible on screen as you are speaking into the mic and delivering your answer. And it's a really nice reminder to you when that blue bar is almost at the end to wind down your response and offer up your conclusion. If you have taken notes, then you can have your notes right in front of you as you're speaking. And again, follow that pattern of organization that we discussed earlier. You've got your introductory statement, we hope. You've got your reasons, your supporting details, and so on. And here is the precise animation, if you will, of what those recording time clocks will look like. The blue bar is still a screenshot, but remember on the official test, that blue bar is going to move all the way over to the right-hand side. Okay, so I've mentioned quite a few things, I think, already about academic speaking, but I want to make sure that everybody attending this webinar understands the very huge difference between academic speaking and daily English. CAEL, remember, is an academic test. So if you think about the English we use day to day, so when we're not in a testing room trying to impress the raters, day-to-day communication, say you're talking with a friend or a family member, you're in the community, maybe in the workplace, even in the lunchroom, etc. These conversations tend to be quite casual, and as such, our vocabulary also tends to be a little bit more casual. We might use slang expressions. We probably don't speak in complete sentences, and we're not even all that concerned, I would say, about grammar and sentence structure. We speak as the ideas come to us, and it can also be quite subjective. You know, we might have an opinion to share, but we don't necessarily have reasons to back it up, etc. If you look over to the right-hand side, though, this is the piece that we need to be aware of. So daily English is not going to be sufficient for your academic CAEL test. Instead, when we speak on the CAEL test, we must make sure that we are demonstrating these exact academic English skills that we're highlighting in the chart. So we don't want to use idioms or casual speech. In an academic test, it's all about formality. The details that we talk about should be very precise and specific and supported. We would never just give an opinion and not follow up with reasons why we feel that way. So we always have to back up with evidence and examples what we are discussing, and that's going to help you with the content, especially of all of your answers on CAEL. Our sentence structure and grammar, as we said earlier, is really important. We don't want to speak in these short fragments. We don't want to ramble on without direction. We need to have a plan. So that the more formality, the more complexity you can demonstrate as you're speaking, the better. So bear that in mind as you're practicing at home as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into the very first question of practice that we're going to do. You yourselves are going to have some time to practice a question in a little moment after we talk about this. But let's have a look at the computer screen first. So a couple of things to point out. You'll notice in the top left corner, it tells you what part you're doing and what question type you're doing. So very visibly, you can read part 1, independent speaking, type A. And type A honestly just means the first question. So think of A as number 1. So the question itself is always going to be more or less on the top right-hand side of the screen. You can see we put a small box around it. So this question says, what do you want to study at university and why? So you can see how this is a personal question all about you, but it also focuses on education. And that tends to be the case for the first 2 questions on CAEL. So my best advice to you right now, honestly, would be for yourselves to review all of your previous educational experiences. Think about high school, think about university, because whatever experiences or skills you've learned there, you might be able to draw them into whatever question you get on your own CAEL test. So the question's there, and it's always going to be facing you when you're speaking. So if you ever get lost in your thoughts, you can quickly reread the question and get yourselves back on track. The timer will always be on screen as well, up top here. So right away, it tells you, you've got 30 seconds to read this question and pick your idea. And then when it comes time to speak, you will be speaking for 60 seconds. And knowing the speaking time ahead of time allows you to plan the right number of ideas to speak about. And once you practice these many times, as I hope you're doing before you take the official test, you definitely get a sense for how much detail you can include. So honestly, if this were my question right away, I'd be picking a major. I would pick English for myself because I'm an English teacher. So I know the question says, what do you want to study at university and why? So the question implies that you'll be taking university courses in the future. Now that's not true for my life. I'm already working and teaching English. I don't, again, all of you, maybe you're not taking this test for school, but be that as it may, we still need to answer this question. So it's a very easy fix. We just have to be adaptable. So when I did my schooling many years ago, back in the 90s, actually, I was an English major as I used my degree to teach English. So for me, I would just change the tenses and I would pretend that I was about to start studying. I would pick English because I have a lot of personal details that I can include there and explain why I wanted to study or why I would like to study English. So this is what I would encourage you to do as well. Again, even if it's not a true to life situation, you must answer the question. So think of it that way. 30 seconds to pick your major, your subject, and come up with some reasons. These instructions on the left of the screen, I know they're really small here, so hopefully you can still see them. But these instructions basically just summarize in very simple terms what that entire big long checklist was talking about. It's still making sure that you're reminding you, I guess, that you must include very specific details and examples as you speak, and you will be assessed partly on your content and your language. We should know these things before we even take the CAEL test. So in 30 seconds, I hope you don't even have to read those instructions. I think these are things you'll already be familiar with. It's the question that you want to read, and then you start thinking of your subject and also, in this case, the reasons why you'd like to study. That's how we use our prep time. Anyway, what I want to do right now is listen to, or play for you, I guess, an actual test taker answer to this very question. I won't yet tell you the score that this man received. I'll save that for after our discussion, but I'll play his response for you now. Again, we've already talked about this checklist, so I won't go through the whole thing with you. But as you're listening to this man's response, can you try yourselves to determine the strengths and weaknesses in these 4 areas? So listen to his voice, assess his presentation or speech skills. Also try to hone in on the vocabulary words, look at things like grammar and sentence structure. The content's important, so we want to know what subject he wants to study and what the reasons were. And we have to make sure he spoke for the full time and also answered the full question. Now, on the official test, the rating team that are giving you the score, they do not have a transcript of your answer. They honestly just listen to your recording. They can play your recording many times if they need to, but they will not have a transcript. They listen and give you a score. As we studied together today, I thought it would be really helpful if we had our transcripts in front of us. So as we're listening to this man, we can also see the words on screen, and that will definitely help us assess things like vocabulary, sentence structure, and grammar, and so on. Anyway, I'll play this first, and then we'll quickly identify strengths and weaknesses, and I'll let you know this man's score. Here we go.
I want to study at university because I believe it's important for students who have passions to take themselves into a place where they can develop it academically by meeting professors who are well versed in the field and also meeting other students in the same age who are also passionate about the same things as you are. I want to study in this kind of academic zone where your passions and your favorite topics and subjects in high school can be really examined and pinpointed, so you can find out how you can develop and find and discover more about yourself. Also, professionally, I believe that university is a great place for you to go develop your skills into relevant job skills as well. So your talents and your interests can also be relevant outside of class.
Okay, that's the end of that recording. Again, before I tell you the score, I wanted to quickly highlight some strengths and weaknesses. And then as a group, perhaps we can guess what score we think this man earned, and I'll let you know. As far as his delivery skills went, he spoke a little bit quickly, but it was manageable. We could still follow, although there were a few places where perhaps it was just a little bit rushed. His intonation is fairly natural, but there were some places where it was a little bit off. So intonation, remember, is when the voice rises and falls quite naturally. And when we finish an idea, we should, unless it's a question, when we finish an idea, generally the intonation in the voice will drop. And if we don't, if we raise the voice, it sounds like we've got something more to say. So as you're practicing and as you record your voices at home, please listen back and double check intonation. That one's a little bit tricky sometimes, but I want to make sure that you're having that natural rhythm. And again, overall, this man did, but there were just a few places where that might have been improved just a little bit. But overall, his volume was just fine. The rhythm was natural. His pronunciation was clear. So for the most part, under delivery skills, we can argue that his skills there are more strengths there than there are weaknesses for sure. His language, though, we'll start with the conjunctions or joining words. That's part of the language assessment. And as you can see here, we've ghosted out most of the response and just left on screen the connecting words. And they're pretty basic and pretty repetitive, as you can see. So this man relies quite heavily on the words and also and so. And although these words are used correctly, the grammar is fine, they're just a little basic and repetitive. His first conjunction up top, the word because, is the only other variety that he demonstrates with his conjunction use. So again, as you're practicing at home and you're listening back to your own recordings, double check to see how you're forming your own sentences. And if you notice this yourselves, if you're only using basic repetitive language, then you have time to practice adding more variety and more interest into the speech before you take the test. His individual vocabulary words are accurate, so they always make sense, and that is key. We always need to make sure we're using words naturally. I would say the language is quite strong. In green, you can see some academic words there that demonstrate also a good variety. So expressions like take themselves into a place or well-versed in the field, academic zone, etc. So we've got a good variety there. The word passion or passionate is a fine word to use for this particular answer, but as you can see, this man has used that word 3 different times in slightly different word forms. So passion or passionate. The raters are hoping to see a little bit more variety. So again, it's just to be mindful. Try to rephrase your own vocabulary if you're extending your own ideas, because the more variety you can demonstrate, the better the score would be under the language use here. If we move on to content, I hope you've noticed that this is really well organized. He does make 3 points. So when he talks about studying at university, he does mention about the first main point in blue there up top, talks about developing the passion in an academic sense. The second main point is to learn more about yourself. And then the third one is talking about developing the relevant job skills. So we do have 3 main points there. But this comes to now the weakest part of the entire response. If we think about task fulfillment, if we think about answering the precise question from the test, we can, I think, very definitively agree that this man did not quite answer the precise question. Rather than explain what he wants to study at university and why, it looks like he perhaps misunderstood the focus. And he develops an answer that pinpoints more about why he wants to study at university in the first place. So there's a little bit of a mismatch there between the focus of his response and the question on the test. So this would have a slight impact under task fulfillment, since he didn't fully follow the instructions. But even with that mistake, you can still see that the organization and the coherence is strong. He even has the concluding statement there, summing up that last point. He also speaks for 57 seconds when he was asked to speak for 60 seconds. So the timing is just about right. So yeah, didn't answer the question fully, but still demonstrates strong, varied vocabulary choice, correct grammar, etc. Still has strong coherence and a well-developed response that connects. So when it comes time to understanding his score, I don't know if you want to guess his score. Just think about that. We talked about the top score being a band 90, and then we count by tens below that. So band 90, 80, 70, 60, and down. So maybe ask yourself, would this man be ready to start studying at a first-year university course in Canada? And if you believe the answer to that question is yes, I would probably put him somewhere around a band 70 anyway, because that's what a 70 is. It's adept. I'll let you know right now that this man actually scored a little bit better than 70. He scored band 80 overall. Now I need to clarify this. The rating team will give an individual band score on all 5 answers that you deliver. And then all 5 of the scores will be averaged out and rounded to the nearest 10. And that's what gives us the band score. I can't say, even as an instructor, I myself do not have access to the individual score for each and every response this man has delivered. All I can tell you is that the average score of all 5 of his answers came out to a band 80. So I can't say that this particular response is indeed a band 80. What we can say is that this response is a strong example delivered by a test taker who has a band 80 speaking skill overall. So we'll look at it from that lens. Now, in today's session, we're going to hear the next 2 answers by this same man. So it'll give you a more well-rounded view into his skill set. But yes, band 80 is a very strong skill, good for him. But this individual score, I'm not sure if it earned an 80 or a little bit lower, but it still demonstrates a lot of strengths there. At any rate, we've just had, I think, a pretty good practice or example given to us by that test taker on his CAEL test. So now it's time for you to practice. We don't get better with their speaking unless we actually practice these skills. So I hope you've got a recorder, probably your cell phone in front of you. That might be the easiest way to do this. So please get ready to hit the record button, because when you speak out loud to practice the question I'm going to show you, I want you to record your voice, and you can listen to it later on when you're fresh and go through the checklist and see how you're doing. But have that ready. There will be still 30 seconds to prepare. And then when it comes time to speak, you'll be speaking aloud for 1 minute. So I'm in a second here, I'm going to advance to the next screen, and I'm just going to start the prep time clock. You'll see 30 seconds and it will count back. And you'll have that length of time to read the question to yourself. It's a different question from what we just looked at. And then when it comes time to speak, I'll let you know. So we'll see how it goes. Remember, your microphones are muted. So please don't be shy. None of us can hear you. So practice to your heart's content, do your best, and at least you don't have the stress or pressure of having this be an official test question, but it is a good practice. Here we go. Here's the screen. You'll see the prep time clock in the bottom left. It says 30 seconds, and I'm starting it right now. Read your question and think, please. Prep time is over. So you'll see the 1 minute timer in the bottom right of the screen, and I'm going to start it in just a second. Hit record on your phone or your device now, and your recording time starts right now. All right, time is up. So if you've never practiced before in a timed manner like we just did, this is what it feels like to speak for the 60 seconds. Now, we don't have time for everybody to debrief and let us know exactly what you were talking about, but hopefully, you were able to pick a career field in mind right away. Again, basing it on your own life is the easiest way to go. So even if you're already working, you can approach this and imagine that you're looking to go into the field, address the question in that way, and discuss whether the research has been done and why that would be helpful or not. So when you think of it from your own life, personal experience lens, usually the ideas are easier to think of rather than just making them up on the spot. At any rate, you can listen to your recording later on using this checklist that you'll get in your study pack and identify your own strengths and weaknesses. So just to wrap up what we were talking about there with our first question, type A, remember you've only got 30 seconds to read and think about your answer. So you need to be very quick with the decisions. That first one we looked at says, what do you want to study and why? Pick your subject in the first 5 seconds and just go with it. You don't have time to really dilly-dally, to use a casual expression, and to go back and forth. Just pick one, be decisive, and on you go. When you begin your speech, especially for a 60-second question, I would get right to it. Give your first sentence that focuses the attention on the question at hand or the topic. In a 60-second question, you would want at least 2 main ideas with examples for each. You might even have time to throw in a third main idea. Whatever main idea, though, that you provide, you want to back it up with precise examples. That's really demonstrating strong structure and maximizing your ability to earn better scores on the test. In this case, because the question asks you to talk about yourself in some capacity, it is okay to use the pronoun I, and you can personalize your response as you talk. So with one practice under our belts, let's move on to type B, which is simply a fancy way of saying question 2. That's really all this is about. You can see, though, the question's a little bit longer this time, right here. It says, in your opinion, what are some of the strengths of high school education in your home country? And when you look at the time clock up here, the good news is you get more time to read and think, 60 seconds. But the unfortunate news is that you're speaking a little bit longer. You now have 90 seconds to fill. That first practice we just completed was 60 seconds in comparison. So to answer a question like this, first and foremost, you'd want to, in the prep time, start listing off examples of strengths. So if this were my question, immediately my mind goes back to when I was in high school. And I'm fortunate enough to have had what I consider to be a very strong, lots of opportunities in the system that I attended. I grew up in Ontario. So as a matter of fact, if this is your question, feel free to give a 1-sentence introducing, where you grew up in the world, what city or country you went to school, and even name the school you went to. That would make for a really interesting introduction, and then get right to the strengths. So I'm thinking of things like extracurricular activities, or perhaps we had very knowledgeable teachers who made learning fun, and so on. So in 60 seconds, I'm hoping you can come up with at least 3 different strengths. The tricky part about a question like this, perhaps you honestly didn't enjoy school and you have a hard time thinking of the strengths of the system that you attended. And be that as it may, we still have to answer the question on the test. So you'd have to come up with something, even if it's not necessarily 100% true for your own life experience. But I'm hoping that if we think hard enough in that minute, we can all think of a few strengths anyways. And whatever strength that we deliver, so again, I'll go back to extracurricular activities, just having such a wealth of activities and clubs after school hours that the students could participate in. Let's pretend that was my main idea for one of the strengths that I'm talking about. As soon as I deliver that, I then want to give examples. And this is actually true for me of life. When I was in high school, I was heavily involved in the dramatic arts program and the music programs. Not only did I enjoy working with an ensemble to produce art, theater on stage, and performance bands, but I might elaborate that further and explain that the skills I learned in high school throughout these extracurricular activities have not only shaped who I am today, but they continue to help me in my chosen career as a teacher myself. So you can sort of connect, and I'd mention what those skills are. I can talk about teamwork. I can talk about spontaneity and sometimes having to improvise on the spot. If somebody forgot a line on stage or if somebody played the wrong note in the band, we'd have to continue on and persevere. And those are values that still encourage me today as a teacher and as I guide my own students, and so on and so on. So it's not just a matter of saying what the strength is, it's giving an example. And in this case, if I really wanted to go for coherence, I'm trying to explain how those skills I learned or opportunities I had were indeed strengths, so how they benefited me personally. So that would be a really well-rounded answer. Anyway, let's listen to this exact same test taker, the first man earlier. We already know he got a band 80. He's going to answer this question, and we're going to assess him in the same way we did earlier, looking at this checklist of skills, all 4 categories. So here's his transcript. Remember that the rating team does not have a transcript, but we're going to use it to follow along. It's a longer transcript because this is now a 90-second question. But let's listen and follow, and we'll quickly talk about what he did well and where he needs to improve just a little bit.
I think some of the strengths of high school education in Canada is that we emphasize history in Canada in a way that does not diminish other countries outside of Canada. Unlike other countries, we do focus on a more global scale of learning where all parts of history is encouraged to be examined. And also, I feel like high school education in Canada also focuses on the importance of mental health, and there's a lot of support and counseling, which really helps students, especially in high school level students where they are particularly more fragile mentally. And I think clubs are encouraged. The fact that clubs are encouraged is also a great thing about the Canadian high school system, because it really encourages them to develop and reflect on their interests and work towards something that they can be proud of and passionate about. Another thing that I feel like is really important is important and good about the Canadian high school system is the fact that scholarships are given out to reward hard work, and also that field trips are encouraged for educational purposes, which really offers just an incentive and also a new perspective in which to consider education under, respectively. And I think those are all just like great points about this education system.
Okay, he makes some really good points there, I think. Again, his speech is a little bit fast, but it's still understandable. So that's good news. Volume was fine. Intonation was more natural in this response as compared to his first one, but the rhythm was fine. There are a few little slight hesitations and interjections, but none that are so long or distracting. So overall, some very strong delivery skills. His language use, again, if you remember in his first answer, he used mostly basic repetitive conjunctions like and, also, and so. He continues to rely a little bit too heavily on these same words, and also, but he's now just starting to demonstrate other transitions, which is better. So we have expressions like unlike other countries, basically, another thing. I don't love the word thing. I don't think it's very strong or academic, but at least I can see how he's trying to connect or introduce that he has another idea coming, right? So instead of thing, I might have said another strength that comes to mind about the Canadian high school system. That might have been a little more academic, but overall, a slight improvement from his first response in regards to the conjunction and transition use, but we still need to work a little bit more on this for an academic standpoint. His individual word choice once again demonstrates accurate words that make sense. So the meanings are clear. We do have a fair bit of a variety of language as well. These are the green points again. So expressions like emphasize history, diminish, global scale of learning. It sets that very academic tone or the register. Once again, though, he gets stuck on one word and repeats it. In this case, the word is encouraged or encourages, as you can see. In his first response, I believe the word was passion or passionate. So it's another reminder to us that as we're speaking, we want to keep in mind we're trying to demonstrate a better variety of words. But again, if you weigh the pros and cons or strengths and weaknesses here, we see more evidence of academic appropriate word choice showing variety in green here than we do with that one repetition. So I would say that the strengths are more obvious than the weaknesses in that regard. As far as a content standpoint, he gets right to the point up top, as you can see. He talks about the strengths of high school education, and he focuses it here in Canada. That's obviously where he grew up. He might have taken the time, as I demonstrated or suggested earlier, about even mentioning perhaps the city that he went to. I think even mentioning the name of his high school. We don't have to include these details, but I think doing so creates a more interesting introduction in this case that are right on topic. But overall, he gets right to the point about the strengths. He lists off 5 different ideas, and you can see them here in blue. He talks about history, which is a really interesting way to take this response. I wouldn't have thought of talking about that, but I like what he has to say here. He talks also about a focus on mental health. He mentions clubs, and I think that was my example, and that's definitely one I would have talked about as well. Not sure about you. He also mentions other opportunities like scholarships and field trips. So whatever benefits we can think of having attended school wherever we did in the world, are fair game, and we want to bring those in. He does provide support for all of his points, but you can see he's got more support for the first 3, and he starts to run out of time. So he's a bit rushed at the bottom there to give full details for all of his points. So sometimes, honestly, if we don't have time to fully develop a point, we might not want to even mention it in a response. It might be better to have, say, 4 main points that are all equally supported than to try to sneak in a 5th one that we don't have time to get into. Totally up to you. I'll let you practice that at home. But whatever main ideas, in this case, examples of strengths we provide here in the answer, we definitely want at least an example or 2. And that would give a well-rounded response. Our speaker does stay on topic the entire time and organizes his answer. He even gives a concluding sentence. To be fair, his conclusion is not overly high level when he says, oh, and I think those are all just like great points about the education system. The meaning is clear, right? So we've emphasized the whole point of this answer. Again, I think it would have been nice to have a more academic register there. I might just say, I'm fortunate to have attended high school in Canada, as there were many benefits of the entire system there. Something like that might have been a little bit more academic, but again, overall, the coherence and the organization is quite well developed here, I'd say. This speaker's task fulfillment in this second response is much stronger than in the first. In this case, he does state his main idea right at the top, and it's bang on. It's exactly the topic that the question's asking him to discuss. He speaks for, I believe it's 1 minute and 27 seconds, and it was supposed to be 1.5 minutes. So again, timing is almost perfect, and he gives a very full response with lots of detail to back it up. So we can start to see, I think, why maybe he's a band 80. That first response, he didn't fully address the test question, but in this one, he got it right. So band 80 indeed. At any rate, let's give you now an opportunity to practice a different question for type B. Like we did before, I'm going to advance to the next slide. I will show a 1-minute prep time clock. So you'll have that length of time to read your question, start thinking about ideas. If you want to write these ideas down, remember to do so. Whatever key points you can write down, it's going to keep you on track. When it does come time to speak, I'll call that out loud and you'll have 90 seconds. And I do hope that you record your voice so that you can play it back later on and do your own assessment. So here is your question, and you can see the 1-minute time clock there at the bottom for the prep. I'm going to start that right now. Okay, so your prep time is finished now. I'm going to set that recording time, the 1 minute and 30 timer at the bottom, and I'd like you to hit record on your phones right now, please. And you can start speaking right now. And that is that. So your timing here is finished. I hope you realize that. I hope you were able to fill the 90 seconds as well of talking time. And again, you can see that this would be it's sort of education focused, but again, you could use experiences from work as well to talk about a subject there about group projects. At any rate, I hope you were able to bring in some of your own life experiences around this. And once you are fresh, maybe later today, tomorrow, or next week, and you get this little checklist in your study pack, please do listen to the recordings that you're making and go through this checklist. Make sure you're demonstrating as many strengths as possible across the whole thing. So let's wrap up what we're talking about here for the second question, and then we'll finish off with our graph question for today. In this type B question, it's a little bit more involved than the first one. So you can start with the general statement for sure, or provide an opinion. It really depends on what the question is asking. For 90 seconds, you probably want at least 3 main ideas. And again, for each of those ideas, you're going to have some specific examples there. Clearly introducing each idea is going to help with your coherence. So think of your transitions. And I wouldn't just use words like first of all, secondly, third. Those words are effective in the sense that they do give us a sequence, but they're also a little bit on the basic side. So try to vary the language a little bit more as you're coming up with different ideas. Basic facts are helpful to include, sure, but this is all about you. So do feel free to personalize your responses as you talk. Again, using pronouns like I and so on, since you're talking about your own experiences. Including a wrap-up statement here, I think is helpful because you do have 90 seconds to fill. So the conclusion will take a few more seconds on the clock and help you use your time wisely. But we should be in the habit of including a concluding statement anyway, to wrap up the whole thing and remind people what our important point was all about. Anyway, let's finish off today here with our visual question. Here are the instructions for your part 1 speaking on a visual. Notice there is no clock or timer on this screen. And that's because you're going to hear these instructions read out loud to you through the headset. I'll read them now so you get a sense of what the test is all about. It says your professor shows you an image. Describe and explain what you see. You will be evaluated on the content of your response, the accuracy of your language, and your ability to reference details in the image. So this is the new part of the checklist that we're adding in just for this question. You have 1 minute to prepare and 2 minutes to respond. Your preparation time starts on the next page. Now on your test, you're most welcome to click the next button. You can see that in the top right-hand corner, and that's going to move you forward to the actual question. If you don't click next, what happens is the computer will move you forward automatically in a very short amount of time. So say 5 or 6 seconds after these instructions are read to you, you're going to end up here anyway. So feel free to use that next button. Just know that you can't go back. Once you've clicked next, you're moving on, whether you want to or not. So do bear that in mind. Now here's the question. Remember, a visual refers generally to a graph, but it could take lots of different structures and formats. This looks like a line graph to me. You could have a circle graph, a bar graph, what have you. So whatever you're looking at will involve a legend with some numbers and data to analyze. So your instructions for the graph are actually beneath the visual here. And they say to you, the instructions are always the same for the speaking on a visual question. The instructions say to describe and explain the information you see depicted in the graph. What conclusions can you draw? So there are 3 things to do here, 3 sets or 3 steps, I suppose, to follow. And I'll quickly demonstrate. You've got 1 minute to look this chart over, this graph over. And the very first thing that we should be looking at is up here. We see an introductory statement that reads that this chart shows non-resident travelers to Canada. And you'll notice the title of the graph right below that states non-resident travelers to Canada. Those 2 statements are going to match, of course. One is an introduction and the other is an official title. When you begin your speech, you're going to want to paraphrase that title in your own words to let the listeners know exactly what type of information we're looking at. And after we've done that, we want to introduce the data, the axis on the graph. So this would be the vertical axis. And if you look closely, you can see the numbers. This is exactly what I would say in my introduction, honestly. I would say that I'm looking at a graph that gives us the number of people who visited Canada who are not permanent residents. And then I might say, information is delivered to us showing the number of travelers from 0 to, sorry, my eyes aren't good enough here, 0 to 5 million, is it at the top? And we can say that the numbers increase in increments of 500,000 per. Down here, we can say the entire study was conducted over a 3-year period between 2013 to 2016. And 3 methods of transportation were included in this study. The graph measures people who drove to Canada from the mainland United States, or who flew into Canada from anywhere in the world, or even who crossed the ocean by boat to arrive in Canada. Something like that would work just fine. I've just described what I'm looking at. That's all I've done. And you'll notice the pattern. So we start again with the title at the top, the 2 axes, the legend, and all the information is now provided. You're not making these details up. You're literally just explaining what you're looking at, which is the good news. But when you practice at home, if you could follow those steps or whatever pattern works for you, that's the way I like to do it. You might have a different way. But by reading out that information in that order, I don't forget anything. And a well-developed introduction can take 15 seconds to say out loud, even 20 seconds. And that's helpful because we've got 2 minutes to fill. So I don't mind taking a bit of extra time here on that introduction. So that's what describing looks like. The explain section is a little bit different. So I'll show you the graph a little bit bigger so that our eyes aren't strained so much to see it here. There are some main points summarized there on the right-hand side. So we can have a look at that and follow along. But basically, when you are explaining the information, what I would recommend you do first is look for overall trends. And when you look at those 3 lines on the graph itself, you can see that the overall trend in that 3-year period shows that more and more non-resident travelers are indeed arriving in Canada, right? You can see how all of those lines go up. And then by that, what I might do is even give some examples. This also qualifies as explaining. I might say, for instance, at the beginning of the study in 2013, approximately 3.8 million people flew to Canada. But by the end of 2016, only 3 short years later, that number had increased to 4.5 million, and so on. I don't have to give the exact numbers for each method of travel, but I think by picking and choosing the data that's going to illustrate my point the best, it's going to well round my answer as well. So once you've talked a wee bit more and explained data and information you've seen there, we have to remember to draw conclusions. This is really important. So drawing conclusions means trying to explain why the data is as it is. So I hope another trend that you've noticed is that in the first year of the study, between 2013 to 2014, there was a slight decrease in the number of non-resident travelers to Canada. And this decrease was consistent among all 3 methods of transportation: land, air, and sea. Okay, so I've just stated a fact. That's another trend. I'm now going to try to give a conclusion or offer up a reason to explain why that might be. So I might just say, perhaps at that time in the world, the economy was, the global economy was quite weak, and people simply did not have the money to travel. And the economy could possibly have rebounded by 2014, which would account for the numbers starting to increase once again. Okay, so nobody's going to fact check your suggestions or your conclusions, but as long as you're suggesting logical information that potentially could have happened, I think that's really all you need to do. Another conclusion that comes to my mind, perhaps the state of global affairs was quite a dangerous place. Maybe threats of terrorism were on the rise in that first year, and fewer people were willing to risk traveling to another country in that case. Okay, so there's a second conclusion. You would want more than one conclusion, once again, to round out your answer. But you've got 2 minutes to fill, so you can really take your time to develop these ideas as long as you're first describing, second explaining, and third giving your conclusions. So you can, lots of ideas now to practice from home. We'll listen now to our Band 80 test taker deliver his answer, and I'm going to just show you the graph while he's speaking, so we can all assess how accurate he is describing the information. Here we go.
Okay, so on this chart, it goes over the non-resident travelers to Canada, and it's from the date range of 2013 to 2016. and it considers three factors: land, air, and sea. And on the left side of the axis, it considers the number of travelers starting from the bottom at 0 up to 5 million. And just by looking at the information, I can see that air travel is the most popular way for non-resident travelers to come to Canada. And followed by that is land, and the bottom is sea. And air travel is by far the most popular way of traveling. It never dips below 3.5 million travelers, and at its peak right now at 2016, it's at 4.5 million travelers. And land and sea in comparison barely make it to 1 million around 2016. And this information is given by the sources Statistics Canada. And as I can see that at 2014, there is a dip in air travel for some reason, where it goes down about 250,000 travelers, going down from around 3.7 million travelers in 2013 to just 3.5 million travelers in 2014 by air travel. So I'm not sure what happened there, but it could be perhaps just a change in tourism or some other aspect that I am not aware of.
Okay. Not bad, but definitely a few things here that we can work on. So I'm just going to gloss over our delivery skills. There's nothing new to point out. I think that all the performance that we're hearing from this speaker has been fairly consistent. We maybe have a more comfortable speed here, or pace. Intonation is a little more natural too, but rhythm, everything else is fine. Pronunciation is just fine. I won't play the response for you again. We'll just have a look at the transcript here as we're pointing out strengths and weaknesses. If we look at his vocabulary, again, there's nothing really new to report. Yes, this man earned a band 80 overall, but one of his biggest, most consistent weaknesses that we can now prove is his simplicity as he's constructing these sentence structures, relying on the most basic of conjunctions like and or so, and using them almost exclusively. So it's just something now, if we could sit one-on-one with this test taker and draw that to his attention, it's something that he could work on to improve in both writing and speaking as well. At least the grammar is correct though, and that's a fair point to make too. His language here is accurate and acceptable. It's maybe not quite as academic in tone as we've seen before. So the blue words or the blue phrases are fine. You know, date range and left side of the axis. We're talking about graphs after all, and at its peak, but we do have some casual language here too, like by far and barely make it. So these casual expressions we try not to use in academic speech. We want to replace those with higher level language. So rather than by far, I might just say significantly greater or stronger. Something like that would probably be better. As far as his content goes, he does give that strong opening statement. It does provide a global description like we talked about earlier. So he summarizes the title. He does read it directly from the graph, which is not ideal, but at the very least, the idea is accurate. So yes, this chart does, I don't like go over, but does discuss, we could say, the non-resident travelers to Canada. He gives us the date range. He does give us those three factors of land, air, and sea. It would have been better to use his own vocab and more fully develop that, but at least it's an accurate statement and it sets the stage for the response to come. You'll notice that there's no closing statement though at the very bottom. He ends his entire response by analyzing or trying to figure out why that 2014 dip in air travel is there. So that also could have been strengthened a little bit. It doesn't sound like he's maybe quite finished speaking is the issue there. But overall, he is on topic. Apart from the lack of conclusion, I would argue that the response is fairly well organized. He does a decent job of identifying general trends. So you can see those blue examples there. We do talk about the number of travelers and which method of transportation is most popular and so on. Some of his data is backed up with A little bit more information, but not all the way across. He doesn't talk as much about the land and the sea, so he might want to offer a better balance, I guess, as he addresses the information on the chart. One of the biggest weaknesses here with content is the fact that the speaker did not offer any firm conclusions. He hints at it. He suggests that there are some changes, but he doesn't fully come up with a logical reason to explain those changes. He just summarizes by saying, oh, for some reason, this is what I'm noticing. So that's not an adequate conclusion. Please keep that in mind when you're practicing. Think back to the examples that I gave earlier to possibly explain why there was a dip in that first year with air travel and so on. Anyway, to complete our webinar today, let's give you one last opportunity to practice speaking on a visual. I'm going to show you a different graph on the next screen, and you'll have a full minute to look at the graph to become familiar with it, and then follow those steps we've just been practicing. Describe it first, explain some information, and remember to draw some conclusions. A last reminder to record your speech as you can listen to it later. Here's your response, and your 1 minute prep time is beginning right now. One minute is up, so it's now time to speak, and your 2 minutes to speak starts right now. And time is up. So that will be the longest length of time for any speaking question on the CAEL test that you'll need to deliver. And there will be 2 more, by the way. We won't get into them today, but you'll have a speaking question on your reading and on your listening, and that will happen in parts 2 and 3. So this is what it feels like to speak for the full 2 minutes. Hopefully it went well enough. Later on, when you're fresh, you can review your recordings that I'm hoping you made. Also check it against the checklist. Please remember to analyze that bottom section too. where it says speaking on a visual, we do need to make sure we're completing all 3 instructions there and accurately describing information. So bear that in mind. That only applies to this one question. Anyway, let's summarize what we've just been talking about here with this visual question. You will have the 1 minute of prep time, so that should be used to become familiar with the diagram. Look at your title, look at your axis information, look at the legend. Make sure you've got the vocabulary, even write it down to introduce those important parts of this visual when it comes time to talk. You will start by describing connections, but you want to explain the trends as well and compare. So in the example we just looked at, or in the first one with air travel, we could easily see that air travel was by far the most popular method of transportation. So you're comparing, you're contrasting, you're explaining information, you're giving those conclusions. Here's what you can do ahead of time before you even come into the CAEL test. There are many different vocabulary words that have a very academic high-level tone, like 3 of the examples that you see here. So words like stabilize, fluctuation, marginal. These are really fancy ways of saying, first of all, it stayed the same, it went up and down, and it was small. But if I use words like that, like small, went up and down, I'm no longer being academic. So at home, if you could memorize even a variety of words that describe information, that things that are increasing and decreasing and staying the same, you know you're going to be using that language at some point with whatever graph comes your way. So if you've got a variety of these vocab words already in mind, you can apply the correct word to the correct situation on the test. So this is definitely something you can prepare for and should, I think. Final reminder to make sure you're giving conclusions. Even finishing off your entire response as your concluding statement with the prediction. So again, going back to the one about the non-resident travelers to Canada, I might end that whole response by saying, based on the information in the graph, it is likely to assume that over the next few years, the numbers of non-resident travelers will continue to increase. Something like that would be just fine because you're basing that on the graph as it is. Overall, regardless of what question you're going to be answering on the speaking test for CAEL, we want you to have confidence, speak with authority, even if honestly inside you aren't quite sure what you're about to say. If you can sound confident, 2 things happen. First of all, the listener believes what you have to say. Second of all, you almost trick your own mind into building up your own confidence. And when you're feeling confident and comfortable, you're going to perform better. I firmly believe in that. We do want to be more formal on the academic speaking test, sure. Always introduce your topic right away and build your response from there. And it becomes almost formulaic. You've got your main idea with some backup details, main idea, supporting details, and so on until you offer the conclusion. We don't ever want to pause for a long period of time, but we can certainly pause for an extra second in between main ideas. That's normal and advisable. So the listeners know when you're shifting topics. Intonation as well can also emphasize key points if you're using intonation correctly. So if you're making a statement and you're finished, the intonation falls, just like I demonstrated there. At some point, remember you start out with your own introduction at the beginning. If you're going to summarize that at the end, we want you to restate those ideas in different words. Always demonstrate a good variety. Try not to use the same vocab all the way through. And transitions, conjunctions, and linking words are always going to build the coherence in the response. And used effectively, we always know when the next idea is going to appear in the response. So help the listener out by including these transitions as you're speaking. And we've talked a little bit by now about the closing statement and avoiding silences as a last tip. So before we log out, as far as studying goes, from home to prepare for your CAEL test, I think that in order to really hone in on academic skills, we want to read academic texts. Doesn't mean you have to go buy a huge textbook about an academic topic or anything like that. I think honestly, if you're just reading even online news articles, you could do that in 5 or 6 minutes with your morning coffee each day. And I specify news articles. I would focus on the ones written in Canada because of the vocabulary there as well. But remember, people writing news articles, generally speaking, have a higher proficiency in English and they're written in a more formal way. So if you're reading those, you are exposing yourself to the structure of language as well as some new vocab. Please develop your sentence structures at home. And this is one of the easiest things for self-study, to be fair. Even if you Google complex sentence structure examples, for instance, the computer or ChatGPT or whatever you're using is going to give you a ton of different examples. Now, we have to remember that not everything we read online is true. Unfortunately, we can't rely 100% on some of the platforms that we use. But by and large, I think it's a really fast way to at least have the bare understanding of what complex sentences, et cetera, are all about. At the very least, you want to be able to produce a variety of sentences on your CAEL test when you speak and also as you write. It's going to help your score overall. Pronunciation is key. If you are all already living in a community and as you're out maybe at a coffee shop or at a restaurant ordering food, etc., if people can easily understand you, then I would say your pronunciation is clear. If people are having a hard time understanding you, then that's a sign that your pronunciation needs a little bit more work. And that's something that you can and should be practicing at home then. You can use digital books and so on if you want to improve your pronunciation. But honestly, it's through practice, practice, practice. Putting together your own study guide or getting together with friends and speaking in English is a good way to do that, as a matter of fact. So I mentioned news already. I think podcasts too is another great way some people enjoy. Even as you're running around town completing errands, if you're listening to a podcast, you're still exposing yourself to the way that hopefully a fluent English speaker is organizing their language. You're picking up new vocabulary. You're understanding how people are supporting their opinions. And these are all going to help you out as you formulate your own answers. Today in session, we practice speaking aloud for 1 minute, a minute and a half, and 2 minutes. And you need to demonstrate that effectively when you take the actual test. So I would continue to time yourself at home. Use a stopwatch or your cell phone, whatever you need to do. But the more that you practice in a timed fashion like this, the more, again, you feel how many details, you get a sense of how many details you'll have time to include. And that's definitely going to make you feel more confident before you take the official test. So that about wraps up our content. I'm going to quickly remind you about the Academic Success Bundle that I mentioned at the beginning of our webinar today. When it comes time for you to register for the official CAEL test, remember, you can use the code CAEL25 to receive 25% off of the CAEL test registration. And you'll receive all of these study products mentioned here for free to help you study. And that package, by the way, is worth about 400 Canadian dollars. So it's a very good deal. I encourage you to take advantage of. We also have a variety of other webinars. We generally deliver about 2 webinars every month. So you can check our schedule at this link and go to the cael.ca website and just type in /webinars. So we've just completed CAEL 201, which is all about the speaking test, or part 1, I guess. Our next webinar up, if I recall, will be CAEL 202. So check the listings there under the schedule and you'll see what date and time it is. All of these sessions are available. Remember, we've got one recorded version of each of them right on the YouTube channel if you don't want to wait for the live sessions. And speaking of YouTube, here's the name of the channel. At the bottom in red, you can see CAEL Official. So this is where you'll find the recordings of all of our free webinars. There are other series there. There's study tip series, CAEL Live. There's a CAEL Prep with Brandy series. That's my series, actually. There's tons of videos up there with extra practice, all free for you to access. So do check those out. There are also 2 free CAEL tests, practice tests, right on the website. I would definitely encourage you to take those from beginning to end. Make sure you're comfortable sitting through the whole length of the test in one go, as that's what you'll be doing on the official test. And you can download the study guide for CAEL free right from the website. And if you wanted to do some browsing someday, especially when we have a sale on, sometimes we have sale prices, you can purchase additional practice tests. We have 11 tests now available right in the online bookstore. There are online courses like Accelerate, that Practice Test Plus activity. The Focus is a textbook series, and there's a small vocabulary builder. Remember, a lot of these items are available for free when you register for the test anyway, if you use that promo CAEL25. Just thought I'd mention that again. And I'm going to leave this with you. You've got your email address at the top there. That's for customer service should you have any questions. info@cael.ca. A reminder of our homepage and online bookstore links there on the right-hand side. And we do have material on these social media channels here that you see listed. YouTube's a good one to go to as it has a variety of series. And we do post little posts throughout the week on Instagram as well to help you with study tips and vocab and things like that. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that you've learned a little bit more about the speaking test and are feeling a lot more comfortable and confident with your ability. Keep practicing, and I hope to see you back for the next live webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.